What is a banter era? Losing cup finals to the mighty Birmingham City, signing players their own teammates, losing 8-2 to historic to be out injured longer than the original player, and owners of other teams telling your best about you being a joke, getting backed by two teams in Europe, fourth year after year, and again, awful and overpriced signings, staff missing out on Champions League to your biggest training ground bust-ups, your own fans becoming internet superstars, selling your best players, and then said fans beefing your players, and again, and most impressively of all, being bottom of the Premier League. But about 15 months ago, something clicked for the Gunners. They went from bottom of the league to fighting for the Champions League like the good old days. And then in the summer, they'd steal two of the most useful squad assets from the best team in world football, as well as having an academy producing some of the world's best young talents. This is the story of how in the last 6 months, Arsenal became the best team in England. In late 1886, a group of workers in Woolwich held a meeting where they decided to create their own football team. And so just like that, Dial Square FC were formed, with their first game being played on the 11th of December 1886 against a side called Eastern Wanderers, where they would win 6-0 and start a snowball effect, leading to one of the biggest and most successful clubs, but also businesses in the entire world. Around a month later, they would rename to Royal Arsenal, and just like that, one of the most iconic names in English football was created. For a name linked to weapons and the military, it sure is fitting that Arsenal had one of the most explosive and fiery decades in recent football history. And so I'm not going to go over too much of their older history, as I want to focus this video more on their downfall from around 2006 onwards. But don't worry Arsenal fans, I'll have a video going over the entire history of the club at some point in early 2023, so stay patient. However, I will focus on the most notable moments of Arsenal's early history, and I don't think there's many days more important than the 22nd of June 1925, when with the manager role vacant, Arsenal brought in the legendary Herbert Chapman. In the 2 years prior to Chapman joining the club, Arsenal had been in relegation battles, where they would finish one place above relegation in 24-25, and just 1 point above the drop the year before. And so with Chapman having joined from Huddersfield, who just won back-to-back league titles, many were baffled by the move. It wouldn't take long for him to prove them wrong though, as he'd guide Arsenal to a second place finish the next season, although they would miss out on the title to his ex-side Huddersfield. The next year, both sides would miss out on the league, but Arsenal would make their first ever FA Cup final, losing to Cardiff. A couple more seasons of building would take place before the Gunners once again made the FA Cup final, this time winning it on the 26th of April 1930, against none other than Chapman's ex-side Huddersfield. This cup triumph would be Arsenal's first ever major trophy, and would start a story of romance between the club and the competition, with the Gunners officially being the most successful side ever in the tournament's history, winning it 14 times. The next season, Arsenal would win the First Division for the first time, never finishing outside of the top 2 until the end of Herbert Chapman's tenure at the club. Sadly, Chapman's spell in charge of Arsenal would end in devastating manner, as he would pass away after growing ill of pneumonia, dying in the early hours of the 6th of January 1934. I don't want to go into too much detail about the career of Herbert Chapman, as he'll feature heavily in my follow-up video to this one, but it has to be mentioned just how important and incredible this man was. The way he viewed the game was truly unique, and would evolve the English game tactically in a huge way, and so losing him would have been devastating. When Chapman joined Arsenal, they had never won a major honour, and by the time the Second World War would commence, the improvements he had made at the club had helped them to 5 league titles and 2 FA Cups in less than a 15-year spell. Now, one thing I failed to mention so far is that Arsenal moved north of the river in 1913, which would of course create friction with another team in the area. Obviously, I'm talking about Tottenham. After their move north of the river, Arsenal would never actually have the chance to play Spurs before the first moment in an iconic rivalry would start, as in hugely controversial fashion, Arsenal were chosen to be promoted from Division 2 to Division 1 in 1914 as the league expanded. Which may sound relatively understandable, until you realise the Gunners had actually finished 5th in the 2nd Division. Making this worse, a team would be relegated in Arsenal's place, who were none other than Tottenham Hotspur. As you'd imagine, Spurs fans were furious, and this, alongside the controversial move north of the river, was the first clash in an iconic rivalry. Now if you fast forward to the late 1980s, bar a very brief couple of seasons in the early 70s, Arsenal had failed to see any real success since a couple years following the war. But then a man named George Graham took charge of the Gunners and brought glory back to the red side of London. In 9 years at the club, he'd win Arsenal the First Division twice, FA Cup once, Charity Shield once, and to this day, Arsenal's only official European trophy with the European Cup Winners' Cup. Now, I'm going to cut in here. I have skimmed over a lot of Arsenal's history in this video. Like I've said, I'll be doing a much more in-depth follow-up video to this one in the new year. Nonetheless, if there's a specific fact or story you want me to cover within that one, please give me a DM on Instagram, on screen now and link in description. Back onto the video. Graham left the club in 1995 and a year later, the Gunners would hire their first ever manager from outside the British Isles. I don't think anybody watching this video will know his name though. It was just some random French bloke called Arsène Wenger. I wonder whatever happened to him. A 22-year career at Arsenal, in which he would win 3 league titles, one of which where they would go invincible, 7 FA Cup triumphs, which would take them to the top of the all-time standings for the competition, as well as another 7 Charity Shield wins. That's what happened to him. But most importantly of all, Wenger's time in charge was really split into 2 separate eras, pre and post 2006. See, in 2006, Arsenal would leave Highbury after 93 years of playing there. And so, the 2005-06 campaign was always going to have significant meaning for the club. It would be an interesting season for Arsenal, filled with ups and downs. They'd lose the first game of the season to Chelsea in the Charity Shield, and would then be knocked out of both domestic cup competitions by the end of January. However, on the final day of the season, they would pip arch-rivals Tottenham to a 4th place finish in the league, having been outside of the top 4 since November, and would also make the Champions League final for the first time in their history, facing up against Barcelona and becoming the first side from London to ever reach that point of the competition. In the 37th minute, Sol Campbell would put the Gunners a goal up, a lead they held until late into the match, where in a calamitous 4-minute spell they conceded twice and lost the game. Not only did they lose the final, but also many of the stars of their squad, including Sol Campbell, Robert Perez, and most notably Ashley Cole and Thierry Henry, who would leave for London rivals Chelsea and Barcelona, the side they'd just lost to. It was truly a turning point for Arsenal, as this level of achievement hasn't been replicated with the Gunners since. Now, I don't want to focus too much on the downfall of Arsenal between these years. As you guessed it, I'll be covering it in the later video. But there is 3 points in time I want to really focus on: 2011, 2014, and finally 2018. In April 2011, American businessman Stan Kroenke increased his stake in Arsenal Football Club, becoming the major shareholder and essentially gaining complete control. In the years following, he would start to run the team like a business, focusing on qualification for the Champions League rather than actual success for the team and the fans in the form of silverware. It would be this switch in the running of the club which would start the iconic 4th place meme, in which Arsenal were completely made fun of for consistently finishing 4th. Fast forward to 2014, and after years of losing their stars and seeing their best young prospects struggle with injuries, it seemed Arsenal had finally built some momentum. They started 2014 top of the league, and in the first time in years, it seemed like Arsenal would be back on top of English football. They'd made their first big name signing since the arrival of the Kroenkes, with Mesut Ozil coming in from Real Madrid. However, it wasn't meant to be. Following the injury of Aaron Ramsey in late January, they would sign Kim Kallstrom on deadline day, who would perfectly epitomise their second half of the season, playing less football than the man who'd been brought in to replace, as Arsenal's form fell off a cliff, falling from 1st to 4th in just 5 games. In the following season, they signed the likes of promising stars Callum Chambers, Gabriel Paulista and David Ospina, Prem-proven players like Danny Welbeck and Matteo Debuchy, and finally another world-class signing in Alexis Sanchez. Despite not really being in the title race at any point across the season, they'd seen improved 3rd place finish and a 2nd FA Cup win on the bounce, as well as the emergence of youth prospects like Hector Bellerin, and going into the 2015-16 season, they looked strong. After a win on the 28th of December 2016, Arsenal once again found themselves top of the league going into the new year, but within 5 games, they'd fallen down to 4th place, bottling their best chance at another league title in a decade, with the club finishing 2nd, 10 points behind Leicester, who would win the league having been relegation favourites at the start of the campaign. This bottle would have a huge effect on the squad, as combined with continued failure in the Champions League, their star players had become tired. Mesut Ozil and Alexis Sanchez had watched their former sides lift the Champions League trophy since leaving Spain, and so, with their contracts running out within 2 years, they'd started to become unsettled, asking for more and more money. Fast forward those 2 years to the end of these contracts, and Sanchez had left Man United, and Arsenal had caved in, giving Mesut Ozil a record deal. But most importantly of all, there was one more man whose contract ended in 2018, and is more significant than anybody else. After over 2 decades in charge, Arsène Wenger left Arsenal Football Club. The most successful manager in the side's history said goodbye after an extremely toxic end to his tenure, in which fans would be battling each other over opinions on whether he should stay or go. And so with Wenger's departure, many were expecting the club to rebuild themselves, with the banter era finally over. Little did they know, the so-called banter era had only just begun. On the 23rd of May 2018, Unai Emery joined Arsenal, and I think it's fair to say he enjoyed a turbulent time in the capital. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about exactly what would happen at Arsenal Football Club and their fans during this time, purely out of respect for Unai Emery. But given that it's recent history, I'm sure pretty much everyone watching this video will remember just how bad things got, with fans and their captain fighting, and some supporters throwing their season tickets away as they didn't want to see it anymore. And so, after his dismissal on the 29th of November, Arsenal knew they had to bring in a club icon as manager to get the fans back on their side, and in Mikel Arteta, they found the perfect man. Having enjoyed a successful period as an Arsenal player in the 2010s, Arteta joined Pep Guardiola's coaching staff at Man City, winning trophy after trophy, with it being believed Arteta played a huge role in the day-to-day situation at the club. After a interesting start to his role, in which the Gunners won just 1 game from 8 in the league, it seemed like Arteta had started to turn things round, with 3 impressive wins over February and March. But then, the thing we don't talk about happened. It seemed this break to the football calendar had hurt Arsenal, as after the restart of the Prem, they took 2 embarrassing losses, including one against Brighton, in which it seemed Arteta had lost the squad completely. But then the tide turned. Emi Martinez came in, and Arsenal's form improved. They went on an impressive run to end the league season, and defeated both Man City and Chelsea to lift the FA Cup trophy. Arteta ball had hit the capital, and they would start the next season by topping the league with a dominant win in their first game.
Well, what the hell, boy?
Approaching the new year, Arsenal were 15th, having been there for weeks. And with no fans allowed in stadiums, they instead made themselves heard online, with Arteta out, trending week after week. But then, Arteta did it again. A strong end to the season saw them finish in 8th place, and having done enough to keep his job, Arteta made it clear to the board he needed to be backed in a transfer window. The likes of Ben White, Tomiyasu, Aaron Ramsdale and Martin Odegaard joined the club permanently, among others, and Arsenal looked to be in their strongest position since Wenger left the club. Then came their worst start to a Prem season ever. Once again, Arteta out was trending, as Arsenal were playing awfully and losing week after week to start the season. But then something incredible happened. After a 1-0 win against relegation-threatened Norwich, Arsenal yet again played poorly, but this time won, beating Burnley 1-0 courtesy of a Martin Odegaard free kick. And then gradually, week after week, Arsenal started to build momentum, playing better with each game that went by, and bringing home win after win. Over the course of the season, Arsenal would see short periods of bad form, before striking the winning formula once again, and by May, they'd secured Champions League football for the first time since 2016. Okay, they weren't completely prone to fuck-ups. This is still Arsenal we're talking about. But after yet another impressive summer window, Arsenal went into this season more confident than ever since that 2006 Champions League final loss. Despite not scoring too much, Gabriel Jesus revolutionised the Gunners' attack, and with a solid defence behind them, the likes of Martinelli and Saka also impressed. And by the 13th of November, Arsenal were 5 points clear at the top of the table, having dropped points on just 2 occasions all season. Arteta had found the formula on how to rebuild a fallen giant. But with Gabriel Jesus having picked up an injury in the World Cup, is Arsenal's season about to fall apart? Who knows? But what we do know is that right now, Arsenal are the best team in England. Trust the process. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed. Sorry if you felt I skipped over a lot of stuff in this video, but don't worry Arsenal fans. This is just one video in a trilogy that will be on the channel. I'll be doing a more in-depth video on both the entire history of Arsenal as I mentioned, but also another video just as soon, more in depth about just what Arteta has accomplished. So there'll be more than enough for you to enjoy in the coming weeks on this channel. Please follow my Instagram, Twitter and TikTok, link in description. But most importantly, like, subscribe and comment what you want to see next, and enjoy your day.